Hi everyone, I'm Lorraine Driscoll, founder of Building Better Brains, and today I want to talk about something that I think a lot of parents are probably struggling with more than ever right now because kids are getting really antsy, they're getting agitated, they're at home more, just kind of stuck at home, if you will. And a lot of parents have reached out to me noticing certain problems that are either exasperated or just that they're seeing more clearly now. And one of those is kids who have a hard time kind of staying calm or go from 0 to 360 really easily, have a hard time with emotional regulation, and so forth. And that is, I want to say first, something that a lot of parents get, I would say, kind of blamed or shamed for when their kids are like this, that, they've done something wrong, they've somehow failed as a parent, they don't have good discipline. And for sure, discipline is huge and really, really important. And, setting those boundaries and remembering that we're not our child's friend, that we're the parent. But I also see lots of parents who, they have 3 or 4 kids. And there's like the one kid who the other kids are, there's discipline, there's boundaries, and they get it. And then there's the one kid who just seems to have such a hard time with emotional regulation. And I think it's important to acknowledge as well that these kids, they don't want to be in the situation they're in either. A lot of these kids, will say to me or even say to their parents and other people that, they feel like the teacher hates them, they feel like their parents hate them, or they resent them. They don't want to be disliked. They don't want to be the bad kid. They're having a really hard time. And we see these moments with these kids when they're having good days where they are good at self-regulating, right? Where you can see they're about to go over, but they can bring themselves back. But that's a real struggle for them. And the more they have to do it on a day-to-day basis, or even within a day, like they might have more ability or capability to do that in the morning, but then as the day goes on, their ability to manage and self-regulate becomes depleted. And I'm going to talk about one of the main factors that can contribute to that. So there's several reasons. One of them, as you know, I always mention this one, is food. Nutrition is huge in terms of what they're eating, in terms of, never mind just the typical sugar and hyper and all that type of stuff, but just trigger foods that are irritants and toxins and so forth that will drive up inflammation, make them more irritable, and so forth. However, the other factor is something called the corpus callosum, and that is a band of fibers, of neurofibers, in the middle of our 2 brain hemispheres. And if it is well developed, it is a really nice thick bundle of nerves that joins and acts as a bridge between those 2 brain hemispheres so that information can pass easily from, the left to the right hemisphere, and then from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. And that is really, really, really important for that to happen. In development, the right side of the brain is what develops first. And if that corpus callosum is not well developed, what can end up happening is there's a lot of right brain activity, and there's not a whole lot of communication going on between the 2 brain hemispheres. And then we end up with a child who's not what we call a whole brain child. I'm not really a fan of that term, but for lack of a better term. So the question is your child's corpus callosum acting as a bridge, meaning allowing information to go back and forth, or is it acting as a barrier? And if it is acting as a barrier, first of all, that means it's not well developed. It's not nice and thick like it should be. It's kind of thin. And so then information is almost, I don't want to say it's not that it's completely being stopped from getting through, but it's having a really hard time getting through in terms of getting through properly. So the information might not be transferred properly or efficiently. And so that's where you might even have issues with slow processing and learning, which I'm going to get into that next week. And so at this point, you might be wondering, okay, so what causes that? Like, is there anything I can do? There's lots you can do. I'm going to touch on it more next week, but there's 2 things that can contribute to it. The big thing that I've talked about before is skipping certain milestones. So I've mentioned how many of my clients, about 90-95%, went really quickly through crawling, or didn't crawl for very long, or were early walkers, or did not crawl at all. And that milestone is crucial for developing that corpus callosum, which allows information, therefore, to pass easily through the 2 brain hemispheres. And as I've mentioned before, there's a lot of factors that can slow down the development of crawling. It's not that you're a bad mom. We've all done it. It's part of our culture to have our kids in baby carriers, to have them in swings and saucers and car seats and slings and this and that. We don't want them to cry. We don't want to put them on the floor if they're fussy babies. My daughter was like that, so I was always holding her. And so then they're not getting as much of that movement because it's the motor system that really, really, really develops the brain, those early motor movements. So that's the first thing. Toxins can be a factor as well. I'm not going to dive into that for this particular series, but obviously, whether it's heavy metals, chemicals, any of that type of stuff, pesticides, that can all prevent or cause issues with the development of those connections. So I just want to mention Dr. Roger Sperry, who was a Nobel Prize winner. He was the one who discovered that the left and right side of the brain has different functions. And most people in our culture have probably heard about if someone's a left brain or right brain. And I want to be clear, there's a bit of a myth with that. It's not that like you're not working with the other side of the brain. It's just that one side is more dominant. And we see that sometimes with children who have developmental disabilities and so forth, where one side is more dominant, but it's like a major exaggeration. And that's why they have a genius in a certain zone like mathematics, and yet they're totally antisocial. And that's often when there's a left brain dominant. So let's just talk quickly about the left and the right brain and their areas of specialty, if you will. So the right brain is more the creative, imaginative type or side of the brain. It's more visual. It's the visual spatial skills are really centered in that area of the brain. We think more holistically from the right side of the brain, so we see kind of the big picture. We see that a lot with dyslexics, which is why they have a hard time breaking like words or letters down into smaller pieces, but also why they can be really mechanically minded and really good artists. So yes, they are artistic as well. And they tend to be, that side of the brain is responsible more for emotions and feeling and so forth. So that's why we always have that joke about women being more right-brained. And so the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. And the same is true for the left brain, right? The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So the right brain is more that logical, linear, things are black and white. These are the people, or this is the side of the brain we use for mathematics, calculation, sequencing, as well as reading and writing. So the language center is predominantly on the left side of the brain. And this is the side of the brain that's just really analytical and responsible for organization, that likes order, in terms of going on to verbal language. So children with autism tend to be left brain dominant. So this is where they don't pick up on tone of voice and sarcasm, because that's the right side of the brain's job to pick up on body language and tone of voice and sarcasm, where it's the left side of the brain that's just like, what is the message? Never mind all the other stuff going on. So that's where there'll be some communication deficits. So back to the corpus callosum. So it's the bridge. We want it to be a bridge for info to pass back and through. That's very, very crucial. That's the number one purpose of it. However, there's another purpose as well, and that is what we're talking about today, and that is to serve as a filter or a screen to stop excess information or activation, if you will, from one side of the brain, so that one side is not just kind of taking over. So it's kind of like you have an orchestra, and if one instrument is playing too loudly and just taking over, hopefully they'll take a cue from the conductor to like calm down or tone it down. So if you think of your child when they're upset, whatever the case may be, like, we're not going here, we're not going there, or no, you can't have that at the store, then the right side will get activated. That's the emotional part of their brain. And, to varying degrees, depending how good your child's emotional regulation is, they're going to react. So if their emotional regulation is really poor, if the corpus callosum is not acting as a very good filter or screen, then that right side is just going to become amplified and the emotions are going to become amplified. If we have a really well-functioning corpus callosum, then what's going to happen is the left side of the brain, which is more about logic and reason and so forth, is going to kick in and help to filter or act as a screen to some of that overactivation. So I want to be clear, it's not just as simple as that. There's a lot of factors that can contribute to emotional regulation, and I could never do it all in one short video. There's also our lower brain as well, our fight and flight that kicks in and so forth. But Basically, the corpus callosum is so important because it helps with the transfer of information from the two brain hemispheres so that we can work in a whole brain fashion, as well as preventing that overactivation with that function in acting like a filter or screen. And which basically, in the case of the upset child, will result in more rational processing. So essentially, we really want to have this corpus callosum for better learning and behavior, and just because it helps to promote, in terms of emotions, emotional regulation. So if you think of the corpus callosum as kind of a middle part of a scale, it helps to balance the two brain hemispheres. And next week, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking more specifically on how that can contribute to all kinds of difficulties with reading and dyslexia, and why dyslexics tend to be right brain. Autistic children actually tend to have a more of a left brain dominance, and how that can affect learning and so forth. But for now, all I will say is if you are curious and you can't wait, if you hop onto my YouTube channel, you will find a YouTube video. I'll post it in the comments below, where I'm doing exercises with my daughter, and anything that does crossover exercises where you're crossing the left side to the right side, even though it seems really simple and random and insignificant, it's huge, and it helps to simulate the effects of crawling. So it's not too late. Whether you think your child crawled a lot or not, there's a lot of reasons why that part of the brain might not be well developed, but there are ways to improve it. So don't feel like it's the end. So if you enjoyed this video, please share. And if you want to learn more, or you want to set up a free 20-minute Better Brains consult to learn more about my programs and what you can do to get started with helping your child improve their learning and reading, then don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for watching.